they produce in India. We are not yet in that privileged position that companies like Google, companies like Starbucks, companies like Amazon, who are formed in our country, have such wide global reach that they manage to park their income in 50 different locations and we don't get our fair share. We are not there. We are worried about our corporations. We had confusion in the McDowell judgment. Justice Chinnappa Reddy, intellectual giant that he was, made no secret of his leftist leanings. He, in his judgment, mixed up tax planning and tax avoidance because maybe in his perception there was no difference. The majority very carefully followed them, but made it clear. There was confusion. Two judges and Azadi Bachao Andolan explained it. Challenged by the tax department. Vodafone clarifies it. It says, and why does Vodafone clarify? There are 4 paragraphs in the majority judgment which cite with approval cases which have drawn the line between tax planning and tax avoidance on the one side and tax evasion on the other side. If those cases are cited with approval by the majority, and Justice Mishra very carefully says, therefore on this aspect we agree with Justice Reddy, it is clear what he had in mind. I think we should let it lie there. Do we need to go beyond that? Vodafone clarifies. We have our own judicial guard, as Justice Kapadia calls it. Somebody called his judgment a thesis. I think it's a tribute. Yes, it is a thesis on tax. It went beyond the facts of Vodafone because the Supreme Court understood, a judge like Justice Kapadia who understood finance, who understood the need for wiping the tear from every eye, which can only be achieved by capital growth, by development, by jobs, not by claptrap. He understood the need for stability. He understood the need for clarity. Foreign firms want clarity. They don't care what your tax is. They want clarity. And that is why he said, we have our judicial guard, round-tripping, circular trading, fiscal nullities are under our law as it stands, something which you can look through. But don't be suspicious. Where did we go with that? And we have the direct taxes code. Instead of the economic benefit text, we seem to be drifting towards the tax benefit test, a very slippery slope. One of the oldest countries which has GAR is Canada. There was an explanatory note issued by the Department of Finance of Canada, and see what they said. They said it is intended to prevent abusive tax avoidance transactions. The word abusive is key here. Abusive tax avoidance or transactions or arrangements, but at the same time is not intended to interfere with legitimate commercial and family transactions. The rule seeks to distinguish between legitimate tax planning and abusive tax avoidance and establish a reasonable balance. In a 2011 ruling, Copthorne Holdings in Canada, the Canadian Supreme Court said to trigger the GAR there, 3 things were required. A, there was a tax benefit, but that's only one of the 3. 2, there was a transaction giving rise to the benefit in an avoidance manner. And 3rd, which is the key, this which gave rise to the tax benefit was abusive. China came out with their own rules, which had the same principle. Abuse of tax incentives, abuse of treaties, abuse of the corporate structure, use of havens for avoidance of tax, and other business arrangements without legitimate purpose. And let me share a very important story with you. The moment the Vodafone judgment came, the Chinese made inquiries as to who were the people associating. They found out PwC was associated in the case. And one of the PwC partners, Pawan, who was with us throughout, actually the Hutchison accountant. He was requested by the Chinese authorities to come and explain the Vodafone judgment. Because they said, we want to make our law in line with the Vodafone judgment. Our draft code, which has been deferred, is a nightmare. To have something as vague as an arrangement to have tax benefit, which is carried out in a manner not normally employed, or rights and obligations not normally created, and results directly or indirectly in the misuse. Now, what is misuse or abuse? So, misuse is something lower than abuse. Where are we going with all this? At which we are told, oh, but why you worry? We have a robust judicial system and these will be ironed out. This doesn't convince any foreign investor. Why does it not convince any foreign investor? Because our Prime Minister told Gordon Brown, when he wrote to the Prime Minister saying, why are you retrospectively applying tax rules to Vodafone? Why did he say that? Because Vodafone structure came, as the Hutchison structure with Vodafone bought. Almost half the companies in that structure were purchased by them. Bestech went out, the Israelis went out, Hindujas went out, Swiss Telecom went out from small circles. All these transactions were offshore transactions by purchase of upstream company shares. Exactly what Hutchison did with Vodafone. Not one of them was taxed. But when Hutchison sold to Vodafone, they sought to tax the whole. So Gordon Brown wrote to our Prime Minister saying, why are you applying it retrospectively? You've never taxed these before, why are you applying it now? If you want to tax these kind of transactions, tell everybody that, look, if you sell an offshore share, we will tax you. Our Prime Minister wrote to him, and this letter was quoted in the Economic Times. He said, I understand that there is no retrospective application of taxation, and a recent court judgment has affirmed this position. I can assure you, sir, that Vodafone will have the full protection of the law and the access to the judicial system in India. These are our Prime Minister's words. He saw what happened. What has happened is people have lost faith. What persuaded the Supreme Court to decide Vodafone the way it did? Believe me, the court had, when we opened the case, concerns about our interpretation of the law. But when they understood how Indian industry is structured, where they understood how India is structured, where they understood what it means in India to have these rules, they rejected the argument of the revenue. They note in one paragraph the key facts which turned the law. The structure was in place since 1994. In all the operations, there were Indian companies, nothing was outsourced. A few thousand crores of tax have been paid by the Hutchison Indian companies to the Indian exchequer. What was at stake was an exit by Hutchison. So what have we done? Here was a case not of financial institutions buying shares in the Indian market to trade. Here was a case of a telecom company coming in where the Indian market was nascent. Nobody knew whether they would or would not make money. Investing 10 billion or over 5 to 6 billion dollars over a period of time. Yes, they made 11 billion, but they invested 4 to 5 billion dollars in setting up operations, in consolidating operations, in making it a pan-India operation, in living through all the vicissitudes of policy changes. and setting up a structure. Now, if you tell a foreign investor who is bringing capital to produce in your country, and let's remember what Starbucks said, they would rather pay taxes where the products are created. He is paying tax where the product is created, where he is rendering his telecom service. What you are now telling him is that if you were to exit, there is a tax on you. Yesterday, Mr. Chidambaram has again said we must exempt long-term capital gains. That's one of the things up on the table. What did the Supreme Court say? They said here is a genuine investor who has been in place for so many years, so his structure is not a make-believe. He is now exiting. Now, if you tell a foreign investor there is a 20% cost on exiting, because please understand one thing, a domestic shares his income by paying tax. For a foreign investor, tax is a cost on exit on his investment. So if he is investing $100, he wants a return of 20. One of the ways of getting a return on his 100, he is not here to live. He wants mobility. He has come to you because of mobility. He has not come to you because he is born and brought up in this country. He has come to you because you are cheaper than where he was, and he will leave you if you become more expensive than what you are today. China is facing that problem today of high cost. This is India's moment. Do we want to make exit of foreign investment more expensive, or do we want to impart greater mobility? Do we want to show we are a stable regime, or do we want to show that we are happy to change our laws minute to minute? Are we a country where people cannot believe what our Prime Minister says? Why will they invest in it? It's not a question of $3 billion. It's a question of faith. Believe me, none of the foreign investors who are upset with the retrospective amendment have analyzed the Vodafone judgment and feel strongly it was such a good judgment. Why has it been changed? They don't care. What they understand is your institutional mechanisms have failed. The Indian Prime Minister gave the example saying, look, the British have done it. Why are they complaining about us? What have the British done? There were off-the-shelf schemes in which Barclays Bank was investing. Unlike in India, where the Indian tax department, unfortunately, cannot have a conversation with an assessee. If an Indian tax officer does something sensible in a conversation with an assessee, you'll have the CBI on the stage, you'll have a PIL tomorrow saying the man is corrupt. But in England, they do sensible things, they talk to tax officials. So, in England, they had a conversation with Barclays and said, don't do this, or we'll change our law. Barclays agreed. They wrote a paper in writing with the British government. They reneged on that and raised a defense saying, oh, but you didn't change the law. Osborne said, well, if you are reneging, so can I. And he retrospectively changed the law. How far are we from that example? So it's not that a foreign investor worries about whether your Supreme Court got it right or wrong. He worries about the fact that he cannot trust you. So why are we shocked then when the chairman of Goldman Sachs, who comes to Bombay on persuasion of one of his board members, Lakshmi Mittal is on the board of Goldman Sachs, he said, let's have the meeting in Bombay. It will be a great confidence building measure. It turned out to be a disaster for the reason that the chairman of Goldman Sachs, who was a rather outspoken person, was asked by one of the media persons, so what do you think of the BRIC? He says, why are you interested? He said, the I is now Indonesia, why are you interested? At which point, fortunately, they managed to contain that news report, otherwise hell would have broken loose in the political system. We need energy security in electricity. We need energy security in oil and gas. Yesterday, the Supreme Court in a hearing was constrained to observe, we all want